So we discussed the three conditions necessary for determination of Q naught, or the quantity needed for profit maximization. So to summarize, we discussed the first condition where P should always be equal to the marginal cost of producing the commodity. So the price line should be equal to the marginal cost of producing a commodity. Two, marginal cost must be non-decreasing at Q naught. So the price line will intersect the marginal cost at 2 points. So we need to choose the point where the marginal cost is increasing. And the last condition was that in the short run, the price set by the market should be greater than or equal to the average variable cost, and the price line should be greater than or equal to the average cost in the long run. Now, with these three governing conditions, how do we determine Q naught? So, to determine Q naught, let's make use of a graph wherein we try to ensure that all three conditions are met. So here's a graph, again, output versus price and cost. And I have my three curves, which is the short-run marginal cost, the SMC curve. This is the average variable cost curve. And this curve is the short-run average cost curve. So I have plotted the three curves. Remember, the short-run marginal curve intersects the average variable cost curve at its lowest point, and the short-term average cost curve too at its lowest point. Now the price line, in all the other cases, while trying to prove why these two conditions are necessary, we had set it low. But now I am putting the price line higher so that it meets condition 1, definitely, which is the price line is equal to the marginal cost. 2, we are interested in this point where the price line is intersecting the SMC, the short-run marginal cost curve, and it's in the increasing part of the short-run marginal cost. Hence, the point A that we have chosen corresponds to Q naught. And finally, P is definitely above the average variable cost. And since it's above the short-run average cost, even in the long run, we assume that it continues to be so. Now, given that we have fulfilled all three conditions, you can see what happens to the firm's profit now. Now, again, if I calculate the total revenue that the firm is making, it is the total price, which is P, into the quantity Q. So you can see that P, price is given by OP into the quantity, which is OQ naught. So OP into OQ naught is nothing but the area of the rectangle OQ naught AP. So it's area of rectangle OQ naught A and P. So what's the total cost? So the total cost, so here we are specifically looking at this particular rectangle now. So the cost to produce Q naught units is OE. So obviously the total cost being incurred is the area of rectangle OQ0 BE. So that leaves me with this portion, which, if I summarize, is my profit, which is total revenues minus total cost, which is total revenue, which is triangle area of rectangle OQ0 AP minus area of rectangle OQ0 BE. So this bigger rectangle minus this smaller rectangle leaves me with this shaded portion rectangle, which is the area of rectangle EBAP. So area of rectangle EBAP graphically represents the profit that the firm makes at the optimal quantity to be produced for maximum profit. So this gives us an indication of how the three conditions govern what is the optimal point for a firm to locate the quantity that it has to produce to attain maximum profit. So let's now look at the supply curve of a firm. So we have already concluded from our previous discussion that there is an optimal quantity Q0 which yields the maximum profit for a firm. And we also talked about the three conditions that govern this particular quantity. Now, what is the supply curve of a firm? To come to that, we have to first define what is supply. So supply can be defined as the quantity that a firm chooses to produce at a particular price, given the constraints it has in terms of the technology it can adopt or it has adopted, and the other price factors in the market. So typically, when you indicate all the different quantities that a firm can supply at different prices by keeping technology and other price factors constant, we call that set of quantities at different price points as a supply schedule. And when we represent a supply schedule in the form of a graph, we call it the supply curve of a firm. Now, what determines the supply curve of a firm? When does a firm decide that it is making sense to produce a certain amount of quantity, and when does it decide that it makes no sense to produce anything or even help it make a decision to completely exit the market? So some of those questions get answered through the supply curve. So to understand the supply curve a little better, we again go back to our graph where we have the three curves for a fictitious firm. One is this short-run marginal curve, the short-run average cost curve, and the average variable cost curve. So now I've indicated two possible prices for the commodity that this firm is producing that the market is willing to give it. So one is a price P1 and the other is a price P2. So let's first study price P1. So what happens at price P1? At price P1, the three conditions that we discussed, they all hold true because the price is equal to the marginal cost where it intersects. 2, the optimal quantity that we take is at this point, which is Q naught, and it's on the rising part of the SMC. And 3, the price offered by the market is greater than the average variable cost curve. It should be greater than or equal to. So it's greater than that. So obviously, you have this particular quantity, which I will call it as Q naught, or let's call it Q1, so that it goes well with the price point P1. So Q1 is the quantity which is an optimal quantity for the firm to produce given the price that the market is offering, which is P1. Now suppose one fine day, the price offered by the market crashes down to P2. And the firm owner sees that P2 fails to meet all 3 conditions. Chiefly, it fails to meet condition 2 and 3 because the price line is well below the average variable cost curve in the figure. At this point, obviously there is no amount of commodity that he can produce to obtain his profits. So combining these 2 scenarios, we can easily come to the conclusion that as the price line moves downward from P1 to P2, the price line moves to a point over here, then this becomes the new optimal quantity. If it moves further down, this becomes the new optimal quantity. And it can continue to move further down till it crosses this point. The moment it crosses this point, which is the point where the short run marginal curve intersects the average variable cost curve, then there is no more optimal quantity for which the firm owner can still make a profit. So any price line below this point, we'll call this the P optimal, P naught. Anything below P naught will not give the firm owner a profit, and it's better for him to stop production. So the supply curve basically is starting from here and going upwards, which means the firm in this case can only look at a possibility of supplying goods to the market if this minimum condition is met, which is the price offered by the market should be at least P naught, and P naught corresponds to the intersection point of the SMC and the AVC. And this bold part of the curve, SMC, is what forms the supply curve of the firm. So what we discussed here was the short run supply curve. If I extend the same logic to the long run, so in the long run, again, I've considered 2 curves over here, the long run marginal cost curve and the long run average cost. Now, over here again, the minimum point of LRAC is intersected by the LRMC. Now, again, I've considered 2 price points, P1, which is being offered by the market, which is well above the lowest point of the LRAC. As long as this is the condition, the 3 conditions that we discussed previously are met, and hence the firm is making a profit in the long run. But as this line starts shifting downward and shifts all the way to a point P2, which is well below the LRAC, then there is no more profit in the long run. So till what point can this line shift downward? So as you see over here, once this line shifts to this point, which I'll call as P optimum, P naught, there is no more profit left for the firm below this particular price line. Hence, profit ceases, and this becomes the last combination of the price offered by the market and the quantity being that the firm can produce, at which it can still hope to make some profit. So obviously, this point onwards, this point upwards, which I'm making it bold, is the long run supply curve. So this becomes my long run supply curve for this firm. So if having defined these two curves, we can also define one more concept, which is called the shutdown point. So what is the shutdown point? So shutdown point of a firm is the point at which the firm can no longer exist in the market, or it has to cease production of the commodity that it's manufacturing because it's no more commercially feasible to do so. So in the short-run supply curve, if you go back to this particular graph, you can see this particular point where the marginal short-run curve, cost curve, intersects the average variable cost curve is my shutdown point. Any combination of price and quantity below this point does not make sense to the firm. Similarly, in the long run, this particular point becomes the shutdown point of the firm, where the long run marginal cost curve intersects with the long run average cost curve. So the shutdown points are different in the short run and the long run, and they're determined by the lowest points of the average variable cost in case of short run and the lowest point of the long run average cost in case of the long run.